The State Capture Commission of Inquiry has spent this week focusing on the evidence from former Transnet Group Chief Executive Brian Molefe. Among his many revelations, Molefe spoke of signing a 17 million rand payment for the legal fees of his former colleague Siyabonga Gama. That was even though Gama had lost the appeal against his dismissal. The Commission also heard testimony from Gama, who took over from Molefe when the latter moved on to Eskom in 2015. Gama was formally appointed as GCEO in April 2016, a position he held until he was fired by a new board in 2018. Gama told the Commission how he met regiment owner Salim Essa in the office of the then Transnet CFO, Anoj Singh. He says Essa called him several times before he agreed to meet him at an address which turned out not to be an office but a Gupta residence. Bonang Mohale, the Chancellor of the University of the Free State, also a professor at the Johannesburg Business School and the chairman of Bidvest Group, joins us here on Morning Live. So lovely to see you, sir. Thanks so much for your time.
It's an absolute privilege, and thank you for having me.
I'm going to divert our attention completely away from state capture for now. There's no way that as Chancellor of the University of the Free State, I can't ask you what you are making of what's currently unfolding at universities. I mean, we saw, if I'm not mistaken, 24 of the University of the Free State students being arrested yesterday. Perhaps let's start there.
So first, I think our heartfelt sympathies and sincerest condolences to the family of Mthokozi Simtumba, a former SASCO member who just got his master's degree. He was an employee of Minister Lindiwe Sisulu's department, a leader of the ANC branch in Kempton Park, and a regional organizer in Ekurhuleni. I think what we saw for the last 2 days is sad, tragic, and regrettable, because leadership is not waiting until there's a crisis. It's about anticipating, planning for, putting systems and processes in place to make sure that we are not blindsided. The students have spoken, and I thought we have heard during the hashtag everything must fall movement. That started with fees must fall, then roads must fall, then decolonization. In a country that has experienced 350 years of colonialism, 98 years of separate development, 48 years of apartheid. All of us, today, 27 years into democracy, we should have prioritized education, because we have demonstrated beyond any shadow of doubt that that is our only avenue that we have given to our children. If you have a university degree, you've got an 85% chance of getting a job. TVET college degree, 53%. If you don't have grade 12, we used to call it matric. In fact, unemployment rate in those is north of 60 percentage points. So if you think that education is expensive, try ignorance. Yeah. I mean, I read what the University of the Free State have actually come out. You, as a university, have made a lot of concessions to the students, one being all students with outstanding debt who have been approved for NSFAS for 2021 are allowed to register without a first payment, because that was one of the big sticking points, the 3,500 rand registration. All non-NSFAS students who have an outstanding debt of up to 20,000 rand may register provisionally by paying 2,050 rand or 7,290 rand for on-residence, and the other one was off-campus. And then, of course, all non-NSFAS confirmed final year students who have an outstanding debt of up to 25,000 rand may register provisionally. This has been going on since the beginning of March at the University of the Free State, and also we saw, as I mentioned in the beginning, 24 students arrested yesterday. What is the fate of these 24 students? And just perhaps let's wrap up the conversation of the state of the university right now. I think more than anything else, we all need to recognize that the most serious injustice was that of exclusion, excluding the majority of women and black people from opportunities. We moved the dial from 7% of the population going to universities to 11%, but that still makes them a small group of the elite Our job, and the reason why we're institutions of higher learning, is to drum into all of our heads that even though we are a small part of the elite, our deportment and behavior should not be elitist. All of us should be working hard for this notion called social justice, so that we can have this notion of an inclusive academic excellence. At the moment, when you come from rural areas, you are a woman, you are black, you go into these halls, you feel like a stranger, not only a stranger, but it is outrightly hostile, because the language, the symbols, don't reflect who you are, and therefore you are not comfortable. We take these students to institutions of higher learning to fail them. And I think this year, more than anything else, having spoken about this for so many years, we are still failing more than 6,000 students in any time to try and get them access to affordable education. I think we must bring about the public ownership of the 26 universities. They belong to all of us.
Indeed.
And I think it should worry us that our children are not getting probably the best education that we can give them to prepare them for the world that is unusually at deadly times.
Indeed, Prof, I get you, but just, sorry, I'm harping on this, but I just want to know what is happening with the 24 students. Are you aware? Do you know? Is it information you have for us or not?
In fact, we know that they've been suspended. I'm talking to the Vice Chancellor, Professor Francis Peterson, because he's not only a reasonable and outstanding man, he's a social activist himself, a defender of democracy, and indeed a change agent. So we are at Eden that we need to be seen to be on the side of the oppressed. That's the choice we've made.
All right. Okay. I'll have to park that there because I know there's a lot to get through on state capture. So very quickly, so let's move our attention there. Two former Transnet CEOs, that's Brian Molefe, Siyabonga Gama, testified at the commission this week. What were some of the moments that really stood out for you in their testimony?
For me, that this is no accident. You see, because even though somebody was asking, what is state capture? State capture. State capture is a system, and it is dependent on four components. One, it's about creating a shadow state where parliament is no longer the primary decision maker. Number two, it's about ensuring that we repurpose the more than 740 state-owned enterprises and state-owned companies to access the largesse for the benefit of a limited few. Number three, it's about replacing the good people with the bad guys whose only claim to fame is aiding and abetting state capture. Lastly, of course, it's about going to the very source of where the money is coming from, which is national treasury, hence the capture of the PIC and ensuring that we can get access to the more than 2 trillion assets under management, which is the biggest asset manager indeed in the continent. The biggest tragedy is that when you look at the figures, really you want to weep, because in 4 years we have stolen through state capture 1.3 trillion South African rands. That's 2/3 of what it takes the South African Revenue Service to collect from all of us as citizens and indeed the companies. For the last 9 wasted years, we're talking about siphoning off on average 200 billion South African rands just to the two Zupta families. The opportunity cost is such that we shouldn't be where we are now. When the virus found us, we're already prostrate, face down, and absolutely finished, having come back from Moody's downgrading us to junk status, increasing the cost of borrowing for government, but also the private sector, but also just came out of a recession, not a technical recession, that lasted 3 consecutive quarters. And of course, we thought that we're putting plans in place to recover from the 9 years of state capture. Imagine if we had not stolen this amount of money, how many schools would have built? How many latrine toilets would have eliminated? How many Michael Komapis would be walking around us with shrieks of laughter, still alive, and yet we killed them? For me, the opportunity cost is that we are now sitting with 30.5 unemployment rate with a narrow definition, when if we had just followed the trajectory of Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela and then of President Mbeki, who gave us 43 consecutive quarters of positive GDP growth, unemployment today will be 16%. we will be talking about the trillion rand that is into the fiscus. Yeah. We will be saying the GDP of this country is 6 percentage points because the population is growing at 1.5%. Therefore, if we are not growing at least more than 2%, we are going backwards. Today, we are borrowed to the hilt. 3 trillion of debt, now going to 5 trillion of debt. We borrow at a rate of 2.1 billion a day, every day. We have now become a nation of beggars. And yet, everything that we need, that the world needs in this continent is found as number 1 or number 2 in terms of mineral resources. Yeah. Tourism contributes 9.8% to the GDP. And yet we know that the potential could be double that. Indeed. That is the tragedy for me, my dear sister.
And it certainly is a tragedy. It really is. I mean, we are seeing lives being lost now. I mean, you've spoken to just one, Michael Kumpempe. I mean, we bring up also Mthokozisi and Tumba. Same thing, a life lost where it really shouldn't have when it comes to the wasting of this money. But if we go back very quickly to some of the revelations this week, and I'm watching the time. We don't have time, unfortunately. We need to start wrapping soon. But what did you make of Brian Molefe's response at the Commission when evidence leader advocate Anton Meiberg and Judge Zondo persistently asked what were his thoughts when news of his appointment first in 2010 as the CEO, secondly in 2015 as the CEO of Transnet were announced ahead of the actual appointments by people linked to the Guptas? I mean, him basically saying that really didn't bother him.
You see, that has always been the system. And I think all of us must accept that the people who've stolen our money are sitting with that money. They've got the resources. They can mount the most longest legal challenges. The modus operandi has been the same. All of them deny everything. They blame others. They shift the focus from themselves to somewhere else. And of course, they can mount a fight back campaign. Unfortunately, what we should be doing as a country today, instead of being obsessed with state capture and what has been stolen, we should be saying, how do we save lives decimated by this pandemic? And how do we preserve livelihoods? Because businesses that have closed as a result of this daylight robbery and industrial scale state capture are now unable to support the South Africans. We lost 3.2 million jobs and net 2.2 million jobs after we have created about 750,000 jobs. So the president sets us a 67% herd immunity target. That's 40 million people. It means if we want to do it in the year 2021, we must vaccinate on average 100,000 people a day. It has taken us more than 20 days to get to that number at a cost of 20 billion, depending on the type, the foreign exchange, the dose, whether it's single or double dose, whether it's imported or made locally. In fact, at this rate, we'll only finish after the end of middle 2021. Therefore, we have set ourselves up for a third wave in winter. If you consider that only 16.4% of South Africans belong to medical aids, therefore the medical schemes collectively have a maximum liability of 7 billion. That's only 2% of all the premiums. When we started the plans, we were already 1.6 million doses short. And in fact, at the moment, I think we don't realize that vaccination rollout is actually a race, because the country that can say we are now free of the pandemic will reap the pent-up tourism demand. And we know that in any country, tourism has the potential to be the greatest forex earner. In fact, 2 years ago, Thailand recorded 20 million tourists. If we had only half of that, we'll increase our GDP by an extra 2 percentage points.
All right, Bonang, there's so much to talk about. We're going to have to leave it there, however. Bonang Mohale is the Chancellor of the University of the Free State. Thanks for joining us. Chairman of the Bidvest Group, also reflecting on Transnet-related evidence at the Zondo Commission this week. So we have to leave you, but we leave you with some breaking news.